Today I want to take a few minutes and talk about some important aspects of IDEA. I want to talk a little bit about Section 504 and then the concept of children who are placed in private schools by their parents. Now, let's talk about IDEA. Now, IDEA is the overriding document, the regulations that basically talk about what is expected in terms of an education for students with disabilities. Now, one of the things that law talks about is looking at three important aspects. We're talking about identification. We're talking about the identification of students who have disabilities. Well, how do we do that? Now, in the public school system, they're designed a little bit more to get those answers a little bit faster than those who are in the private schools. But the identification of any child with a disability is essential. And one of the instruments that is often discussed is the testing that is done. Now, when a child is identified and someone says, this child is acting this way or they're responding this way, we think they need to go into some type of a special education program, need additional assistance because they have an identified disability. Now, the next thing is the evaluation. How do you determine that? Once you've identified that we think we have 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the number would be, number of students who have a disability. The question is, how do you evaluate that? How do you determine specifically whether the child does in fact have that disability? And one of the things that this particular law talks about is making sure that it is a validated test. Not just someone sitting back and going, well, that's really nice, but I think this person has this particular issue. Well, what testing did you do to ensure that that actually is the right diagnosis for that child? Once the child has been identified, the child then gets evaluated, and then the placement occurs. Now, it's really important that the placement be appropriate. Now, in the public school systems, they have both inclusive schools and they also have programs that are set aside specifically because of particular disability where the child cannot operate effectively in a normal classroom setting. But the law is very clear that in the public school, every effort must be made to ensure that the child is in the most normal setting. If a child can handle the workload and do that work even with assistance, they must be placed in a normal classroom setting, even if that means that they're taken out of that for specialized assistance. Again, it's important that you as the principal of the school clearly understand what that law says. Do not underestimate the importance of knowing every aspect of that law. Because if you are a public school principal, failing to abide by that could result in you being sued by the parents for failure to provide a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. Notice, the least restrictive environment. That's the key. Now, when you talk about those types of things, we also talk about Section 504. Now, Section 504 is basically designed to deal with discrimination and really anti-discrimination. What can you do to ensure that a child is not being discriminated in their education based upon their particular disability? Now, there are accommodations that can be used, again, within the context of a normal classroom, and we're going to get to those a little bit later as we go through in the course, because it's really important that you understand it. But there are three basic types. One is environmental, making sure that the accommodations, perhaps that the child needs to sit closer to the front because of a vision or a hearing problem. They need to make sure that they have larger print in their textbooks because of a vision problem. There can be organizational accommodations. A child, because of the disability, is unable to work in a close environment. Those are important things that cannot be overlooked. Also, behavior. Accommodations because of behavior. For instance, if a child has Tourette syndrome and they blurt out things, you've got to be certain that the child is not being disrespectful, but it's just part of their disability, the disease that they have that causes them to do certain things. So when you look at accommodations, look at those three areas: environmental, organizational, and behavioral accommodations. Again, important that you clearly understand the law. Now, you as a principal need to clearly look at the responses that you make. This week, when you were reading chapter 3, it says, what does a principal need to know about special education eligibility? And the quick points that I think are important there: number one, not all students in need of classroom supports or accommodations are eligible for special education services. Just because they have a disability does not mean that they are required to have special education services. There must be documentation. There must be that identification, evaluation. The evaluation must clearly say and spell out what can and should be done to provide the best education. The school staff should document any pre-referral interventions and their outcomes. What does that mean? That means if you think a child has a disability, what did you do in the confines of your classroom? What did you, as an administrator, do to ensure that you were doing everything possible? So the key there is documentation. Documentation. Have the teachers specifically write down what they did. Make sure that they keep a log of all interactions between themselves and the parents, between themselves and the administrator. You, as the administrator, must keep an accurate log of all of the conversations, all of the documentation, because you, as the head of the school, are then responsible for ensuring that the child is receiving the appropriate education. Schools need to follow timelines for responding to referrals and making decisions promptly. I have seen in too many cases years ago where schools thought, well, we'll just wait it out. If we just keep putting off the testing, if we keep doing this, that they'll probably go away. They'll either transfer, the parents will give up, and we'll just keep on going. The law clearly states that there must be appropriate education and that it must be timely. If you say that a child might be eligible for services and they've been referred for testing, you can't simply say, well, it's going to be 6, 8, 10 months before you're tested. If you do, expect that you will be sued and expect that you will lose. Parents and guardians need to be included in every stage. They must be informed. You must document things and share that. Now, does that put a burden on the teachers? Absolutely. But the reality is that's what the law says, and that's what you are required to do. You as an administrator are required to ensure that your teachers understand that and not simply say, oh, well, you didn't understand. That's not an excuse. Some students who are not eligible for services under IDEA may be eligible under Section 504. So they might not require specific services. Their needs can be met by simple accommodations. In many of our schools, our Catholic schools, accommodations are key. We make accommodations. Now, in some cases, we have special services brought into our schools. That's why it's very, very important that as an administrator, you look at the document that says children with disabilities placed by their parents in private schools. This document here gives you a very clear idea. And in just a minute, I'm going to walk through some of those concepts that will hopefully help you make the best decisions possible for the students in your schools, for the parents, and for your faculty. In the document, children with disabilities placed by their parents in private schools, there is a wealth of information. Now, in the early part of this document that you see on the screen, there are some definitions that are crucial for you to understand. First of all, it says in determining school districts' responsibilities for children with disabilities in private schools, generally such children are in one of three groups, and public agency responsibilities will vary based upon the group into which the children fall. First, children with disabilities placed at private schools by their parents when free, appropriate public education from a public agency program or placement is not at issue. These children, some of whom must be provided special education and related services consistent with their numbers and needs, have no individual entitlement to services under Part B.34C.F.R, and you can see the regulations there. What does that mean? That means that if a free and appropriate public education is available, then the local school district may not be responsible for providing services. Now, if you go down a little bit, it says children with disabilities placed at a private school by their parents without the consent or referral by the public agency because the parents believe that the public agency has not made a free and appropriate public education available in a timely manner. That basically means that if a parent says, my child isn't getting the services that they need in the public school, I want them to go to a private school where they will be able to get the help that they need, the education that they need. Now, notice it says if a hearing officer or court agrees with the parent and finds that there has been a denial of the free, appropriate public education and the private placement is appropriate, the parents may be able to obtain tuition reimbursement. Important, because that says that there most likely will be a hearing. So it's not just simply an automatic thing. Now, the third point is children with disabilities placed at private schools by public agencies as a means of providing special education and related services. That means that in some cases there are private schools that are designed specifically for children with severe disabilities. The public school system might say, we can't really handle this. We are going to turn this child over for the education of the child to this private institution. And in that case, the public school system is responsible for the tuition. Now, other terms, the expenditures, a proportionate amount of the federal funds available under IDEA Part B is expended for services parentally placed private school children with disabilities. What that means is that funding is there, but it has to be proportionate to the total number of students in the system. So that means simply that if a school costs $50,000 to attend a private school, but yet if the child was in a public school system, they would only be using the equivalent of $20,000, then there becomes a question of the proportionate amount of the funding. Services delivery through consultation. That's an important point there, through consultation. Consultation is incredibly important because there must be consultation between the private school and the local school district. Location of services. Special education related services may be provided to parentally placed private school children with disabilities on the premises of the private school, including religious schools, in a manner that does not violate the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. What that says is if the jurisdiction so desires, they can in fact send a specialist to your school for particular help with students. Now, some of you might say, well, wait a minute, you're told a lot of different things, but the reality is the local school district may do that. I know of certain schools in the United States where they have outside folks coming in and working with students on specific areas because of the disabilities of those children. Does that mean that everybody does it? No. It means that it must be approved by the local districts. It depends on where you live, unfortunately. Now, you'll also see, again, important terms, child fine. Child fine. Local LEA shall consult with appropriate representative of private school children with disabilities on how to locate, identify, and evaluate private school children with disability. I cannot emphasize the importance of what this says. Because what it says, that the LEA shall consult. If your school is not being consulted, I would basically call up your local county, and if you don't get an answer, go to the state and say, we have never been consulted. Now, the one thing I must warn you is that in some jurisdictions, they use the diocesan office as the central point for this. So be careful. First, check with the diocesan or archdiocesan office of education to see if they have been involved in consultation with the local educational agencies. Child count. Each LEA shall consult with representatives in deciding how to conduct the annual count of the number of private school children with disabilities. In most cases, this is done through the diocesan office. Again, important. If this has never happened in your school district, I would strongly suggest that you call the Catholic Schools office and ask them how that's done. Most principals are given the opportunity to fill out a form that asks how many children have disabilities in your schools, what are they, and again, that is conducted each year. Service delivery. Each LEA shall consult with appropriate representatives of private school children with disabilities to decide which children will receive services. That basically says is that not everyone will get it. Because this is the important line. No private school child with a disability has an individual right to receive some or all of the special education and related services that the child will receive if enrolled in a public school. So if a parent decides to send their child to your school, might they get some help? Might they get some additional services? Yes, but there is no right, because the public schools say they offer that. The service plans: each private school child with a disability who has been designated to receive special education and related services must have a services plan. The LEA is responsible for ensuring that a representative of the private school attends each meeting. If the representative is unable to attend, other methods to ensure his or her participation must be used. That basically says that you can't be excluded. If you have a child that is getting assistance or is eligible, you must be consulted. Now, in the toolkit, as you've noticed, they talk about the provisions that are related specifically to children who are placed in private schools. Again, what we're talking about for the most part is Catholic schools. This particular toolkit is designed to support the stakeholders. That means the principals, the teachers, the assistant principals, the parents, the students, and any other concerned individuals. That might even include your support staff. That might include your cafeteria staff, depending on the needs of the individual child. Now, this is really important because the consultation checklist, because it says schools must consult in a timely and meaningful way with appropriate representatives of parentally placed private school students with disabilities throughout various phases of development. And you'll see here, this is what must happen. They must deal with this activity. The first one is child find. How do you locate, identify, and evaluate private school children with disabilities? If you have a child that has a particular disability and you need that child tested, how do you know how to do it? Child find is supposed to help you with that. They're required to list the participants, the date that it occurred, and the results. Child count, how to conduct annual count. Again, who's in attendance, the date, what's the result. Service delivery, service plan, same thing. This is the consultation checklist. Your school should be involved in this. If your school isn't, I would check again with your diocesan schools office to find out who is. Now, as you see, as you have gone through this document, it's really important because they talk about the provisions under IDEA in the very first section. Okay? And you'll see here, this is how all the topics have been designed. Why is this important? Because as you assume your role of leadership in your school, you need to refer back to this document. You, as the administrator, must be familiar with this document so that you can carry out your legal responsibilities and your ethical and moral responsibilities to the children who you accept into your schools, who have some type of disability. First thing says, familiarize yourself with IDEA regulations. This is critical. And it shows you exactly where to get those. Now, again, they talk about the memorandum cover letter. This basically is the letter that says, we are interested in finding out more about this. Please make sure that we're included. Again, this document is important because it tells you where to go to get information. Now, there are a lot of documents. Yes, you as the principal must have a clear understanding of these regulations. Now, what you'll see here in this particular practice, which I think is important, because if your school in fact does have a program for students with disabilities, do you have information, a brochure? What information do you have that communicates information to your parents? Because, again, making sure that the stakeholders understand what you are willing and can do and what you cannot do. Do you have a way to disseminate that? How do parents know what's going on? In our Catholic schools, I firmly believe that this is one of our failures. We oftentimes do not do enough in terms of communicating the programs that we have. Some of that is a public relations issue, because schools don't want to be known as a school that only caters to students with special needs. But my friends, the reality is, we, as Catholic schools, have as our mission to educate the children, to educate all of the children who come to us, to ensure that we give them the best that we can. By creating this brochure, it also allows you to really make sure that you, as an administrator and as a teaching staff, understand what you can do and what you can't do. In terms of the website, again, always important. Do you have any kind of preparation or presentation at back to school night, at your open houses, where people can learn specific information about what you do? This is important. How do people get back and forth? How do they find the information? Who do they contact? Is it clearly spelled out? That chain of command, that channel for communication. Where do people go? Now, again, this document has a great deal of information. Talks about developing technical assistance documents. Technical assistance means providing families with the information that will help them make the right decisions. Create an action plan to improve consultation and collaboration. Consultation and collaboration are incredibly important. As you see there in this one line, consultation is an important element in implementing the IDEA provisions. Timeliness and meaningfulness, genuine opportunity, and the steps to ensure participation. Now, in every state, they have an advisory panel. Most people don't realize that, but they do. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to find because they hide it in the back rooms of their websites, but they do have state advisory panels. They're charged by the federal government to do that. Now, again, the documents that are here, definition of private school children with disabilities, child fine, service basic provisions and requirements, expenditures, the child count, all this is spelled out. Make sure that you're very familiar with this information. It is a lot of information to take in, but it is crucial that you, as the principal, understand it. What I like in this document is that they talk about, and they have designed it in such a way that they have a summary of applicable IDEA provisions. Again, critical that the administrator know those. Now, in this case, they give you a little quiz that you can take to make sure that you know what's going on. Now, again, this is a document that I cannot emphasize enough. This is critical if your school has any type of program for students with special needs. This is what you use as a basis for the decisions that you make. This is where you go to make sure that you have provided the information necessary to your parents, necessary to your faculty. Everything from the location of services, as you see on the screen, to transportation. Does your school provide transportation? Will the state, in some cases the states provide free transportation? It depends. Do you know where to go? Do you know where to go to find that information? Now, again, this document talks about tips for contacting private school representatives. One here is for our schools in the Catholic school system is very, very important. For example, Catholic schools have diocesan offices that are solely dedicated to education. Contacting the central office can ensure that all the schools represented by the agency will receive the information from the SEA and or LEA in a timely, meaningful manner. I like this. Create an address book. Where can you go if there's a problem? Do you know where to go? Who to call to find the answers to the questions? Face-to-face meetings. I know that this is often difficult because of distance, but I would strongly suggest to you as a principal that at least once a year, if your diocesan office does not do it, I would meet with that person in the diocesan office who is charged with dealing with issues related to IDEA and students with disabilities. If you don't do that, you are doing a disservice to your faculty and, most importantly, to the students, because you might be missing out on services that can be provided. Again, this document even gives you sample letters of introduction. What to look for, when you're writing the letter. Again, make sure that you clearly understand what this document is telling you, because it is the basis, it is the foundation upon which your plans of action will be built. We'll talk a lot about those in the coming weeks. And as you go through each section of this document, it goes into great detail about child find, child count, expenditures in great detail. Do not underestimate the importance of knowing and understanding what this document has to offer. Again, strongly suggest that as you begin your process of administering a program for students with disabilities in your school, that you fully understand this document. This is a great toolkit. It is designed to help you understand the complexities and also the changing regulations that often occur. I hope the information that I've shared today regarding IDEA, Section 504, and the toolkit from IDEA dealing with children with disabilities placed by their parents in private schools will give you a much better sense of what you, as the principal in a school, must do to ensure that students with disabilities are identified and are provided with the services that they need to be successful. While they might not be paid for by the local school district, you as the principal must clearly understand the laws and the regulations for implementing a successful program for students with disabilities in your school. As always, if you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to contact me. I appreciate it and have a good day.